Who among us doesn't love a movie that just swings for the fences and serves up a boatload of insanity? Sausage fingers forever. Yet it's sadly far more common that films fall short of the wild expectations set by their premise, title, and even their trailer. Movies are written, shot, and edited, and then the marketing department gets a hold of the zaniest material and sells it as something that it really isn't. We've all been burned by a film that was sold on the strength of an insane idea, yet the movie itself failed to live up to that craziness for whatever reason. The lesson here: when Hollywood claims they're throwing big money behind a nutty concept, be skeptical. Gareth here from WhatCulture.com, and here are 10 movies everyone wished were way crazier. Number 10, The Purge. 2013's The Purge was sold on the strength of its irresistibly original logline. What would you do if all crime, including murder, was legal for 12 hours once per year? It's an electrifying provocation, and one ripe for an epic, chaotic, dystopian action film in the vein of a classic John Carpenter. Except the original Purge was ultimately produced for just $3 million, ensuring the action was largely confined to a claustrophobic home invasion scenario instead. The audience was given only scant glimpses of the mayhem unfolding in the outside world, as ensured that many felt The Purge failed to live up to the lofty expectations posed by its premise. Teeing up such an expansive, exciting scenario, and then limiting it to a single house just felt like a huge cop-out, really. Thankfully, the film's success at least ensured that bigger budgeted sequels went much harder, chronicling the insane carnage spilling into the city streets. But watched today, the original movie seems hilariously quaint compared to what came after. Number 9, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. One of the big recent critiques of the Marvel Cinematic Universe has been how incredibly unadventurous its exploration of the multiverse has actually been, especially in the wake of something as phenomenally creative as Everything Everywhere All at Once. Like I said, sausage fingers forever. This reached an apex in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, a film which was hyped up as an impossibly weird, insane, and scary take on the multiverse, courtesy of horror legend Sam Raimi. Yet at the end of the day, Multiverse of Madness is still an incredibly safe and neutered take on the abstract, ridiculous, and horrifying potential of the multiverse. Outside of the famous Illuminati sequence and Zombie Strange, it just doesn't get zany enough, especially with bloody Raimi involved. The film spends less time immersing us in the multiverse's truly off-the-wall potential, and more showing us worlds where the traffic lights are different colours. Yeah. It would be disingenuous to say that the film isn't without its creatively wild moments, but not nearly enough of them. Rather than taking a hallucinogenic tumble down the multiversal rabbit hole, it feels more like a window that was cracked open for just a few scant moments before being slammed shut on our fingers. Number 8, Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. What the hell else do you need to know apart from that awesome title? Based on Seth Grahame-Smith's hit novel of the same name, nobody should have been complaining that a film about a young Abraham Lincoln secretly fighting vampires took itself too seriously. Despite the obviously giddy B-movie potential of the setup, this is a bafflingly straight-faced, humorless piece of work that sees writer Graham Smith adapt his own material into an overly talky, often downright boring slice of revisionist history. Even with the heightened conceit, there's a misguided intent here to pass genuine comment on slavery and racism in 19th century America, something nobody paying money to see a film called Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter was possibly in the market for. Outside of a few inspired action beats, like Lincoln having a whole damn horse thrown in his face, this is maddeningly dull filmmaking that vacuums all the joy out of what should have been a fun slice of knowing gonzo schlock. Number 7, Hancock. Will Smith playing an alcoholic, wildly irresponsible superhero is one of those cinematic ideas that really just sells itself. Who among us would seriously need persuasion to want to see that, eh? Yet Hancock is unfortunately a textbook example of an inspired idea which got put through the studio mangle and emerged out the other side a safer, less interesting piece of work. Hancock started life as a spec script written by Vi, Vincent and Go called Tonight He Comes, which was considerably edgier as it focused on a PTSD-afflicted superhero struggling to deal with all the human tragedy he's witnessed, and culminates in him drunkenly wiping out an entire police force. But it was ultimately rewritten into a more palatable PG-13 blockbuster-star vehicle for Will Smith, where those edges were planed away in favor of a more conventional crowd-pleasing treatment. Go's original script, while denying the redemptive arc of its protagonist which occurs in the final movie, at least sounded wackier and more interesting in every way that the movie could have been. Instead, the version we ended up with was antiseptic focus group slop solely concerned with making hundreds of millions of dollars, and artistically speaking, it was all the worse for it. Number 6, Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. You can't really blame any slasher movie franchise for running out of ideas by their 8th installment, and honestly there were far worse ideas for Friday the 13th than taking Jason Voorhees to New York City for his next rampage. The marketing for Jason Takes Manhattan of course focused on the endeavor indelible image of Jason stalking his way through Times Square, suggesting a film centered around Jason hacking his way through the Big Apple's most iconic tourist hotspots. But Jason Takes Manhattan pulls a cruel bait and switch, given that Jason doesn't actually arrive in New York City until the third act, and spends barely any time at all in recognizable locations or even basic cultural hallmarks like, you know, the subway. Sure, it's the Friday the 13th movie where Jason punches a guy's head off, but for a film sold so pervasively on the fun of Jason carving up NYC, it's a profoundly ordinary slasher flick that rarely paints outside the familiar franchise lines. Number 5, The Human Centipede First Sequence. The Human Centipede is a textbook example of a movie that sold itself on its completely deranged premise, one that the final film ultimately failed to live up to. In case you're unaware of the setup, and God bless you if so, The Human Centipede follows a mad German surgeon who kidnaps 3 tourists and surgically sews them together, from ass to mouth, creating the titular, creature. It's a revolting concept, no question, yet filmmaker Tom Six takes a tamer approach to the material than you'd ever reasonably expect. Styled less as schlock and more as a European art horror flick, The Human Centipede is a relatively slow and restrained horror romp, which actually spares the audience the most grotesque visuals they might expect to see. It's still a fundamentally nauseating idea, yes, but a classic case of a high-concept horror movie that really wasn't shot to be that crazy. But Six evidently heard the complaints, and as proof you should be careful what you wish for, made the terrible 2 sequels considerably edgier, grosser, more try-hard affairs. Number 4, Gemini Man. Will Smith has an unfortunate knack for getting involved with interesting projects which are ultimately sanitized into characterless oblivion once they've been put through the Hollywood sausage factory. Case in point, Gemini Man was hyped on the delicious premise of Will Smith playing a retired soldier who is targeted for assassination by a much younger version of himself. Will Smith versus Will Smith, let's go. Despite the thrill of seeing one of the biggest movie stars on the planet face off against his digitally de-aged younger self, Gemini Man largely plays out like a dead ordinary action thriller, rather than fully exploiting the uniquely uncanny weirdness of its setup. On a storytelling and character level, this is an energy-devoid take on a high-concept premise, the dialogue merely serving as a listless bridge between action sequences which, considering the $140 million budget and Oscar-winning director Ang Lee in the chair, come off as disappointingly joyless. Evidently, far too much money was spent on both the not entirely bad digital de-aging and Lee's insistence to shoot the film in 120 FPS 3D, that Gemini Man had no latitude to be anything more than a generic sci-fi thriller, pandering to the most casual and easily satisfied of audiences. This was an opportunity for Will to get freaky with himself, and he blew it. Number 3, Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. And now we have another Seth Graham Smith adaptation, this time his hilarious Jane Austen horror parody novel, Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. The trailers did a solid job marketing the movie as a bonkers fest of sexy corset-clad ladies and suited-up guys kicking undead ass. But ultimately, the movie has the balance between its genre hybrid elements all wrong. This is far more of a Pride and Prejudice adaptation than anyone probably wanted it to be, the horror aspect instead ungenerously spiced throughout, unaided by the restrictive PG-13 content rating. It's a film that can't decide whether it wants to appeal more to Austen fans or gorehounds, and by attempting to split the difference, satisfies neither side. Rather than lean into the camp shamelessly, like Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, it ends up taking itself far too seriously, and in turn drains most of the fun out of the whole affair. What a damn waste. Number 2, Cocaine Bear. It's probably fair to say that Cocaine Bear never really stood a chance of living up to its title, poster, or gloriously insane trailer. But at the same time, a horror comedy about a coke-huffing bear slaughtering its way through a national forest should be pretty wild, right? While Cocaine Bear does deliver some gnarly gore and balmy set pieces, it's ultimately a relatively tame and dignified affair compared to the more rough-edged, nasty, effed up movie you were probably hoping for. Clearly, the biggest issue is the movie's baffling decision to focus so much of its scant 95-minute runtime on human characters you won't ever be compelled to care about. Again, this is in a film about a substance-afflicted bear killing people. The bear is kept off screen for long portions of the movie, presumably to keep the budget down. And overall, director Elizabeth Banks keeps the focus far more intently on comedy than horror, which is a bit of a shame. For all of its marketing as Hollywood's next big wild B-movie, Cocaine Bear feels oddly ordinary, an excessively sanitized, tidied up riff on a deliriously amusing idea. Number 1, 50 Shades of Grey. This entry applies to all 3 50 Shades movies in fairness. When it was announced that E.L. James' best-selling erotic Twilight fanfic was being adapted into a movie trilogy, many speculated on just how explicit they would be. After all, this is a major Hollywood production distributed by Universal and starring actual actors. How graphic could it possibly get? Even so, there was hope that 50 Shades of Grey would be a sex-positive erotic drama that delivered some gratuitous titillation to the hugely underserved cinematic demographic demographic of horny middle-aged women. Yet all three movies are shockingly tame affairs where smut is concerned, featuring around 50 to 20 minutes of tasteful, non-exactly explicit fornication that scarcely gets the pulse racing for any but the most demure of viewers. Frankly, there's no getting around the fact this is a franchise that needed full-frontal male nudity. Its target audience deserved that, as well as more adventurous and involved sex scenes, rather than the aggressively anodyne cinematic rutting we ended up with. Basically, Universal produced a trilogy of pathetically soft-core porn films that seem bafflingly embarrassed of their own reason for existing. And that's our list. Know of any other movies everyone wish were way crazier? Let us know all about them in the comment section right down below, and don't forget to like, share, and click on that subscribe button while you're at it. Also, if you like this sort of crazy content, then head on over to whatculture.com and find some more fantastic articles just like the one this video you're watching right this second is based on. I've been Gareth from whatculture.com. Thank you very much for watching this lovely video today. Hopefully I'll see your faces very, very soon, but in the meantime, have yourself the best of days. Bye bye!